Welcome back to All Things Art. Eric here, and in today's project we're going to cover how to add magnets to your 3D prints, when to use magnets, where to add magnets, and how to make sure you're using the correct magnets. This way you're getting the maximum strength. All of that in today's video. Okay, so when it comes to adding magnets to your 3D prints, there's a few things that you want to consider. First, being the most important, is which magnets to choose. You want to make sure you're choosing the correct magnets. This way you have the most strength. This way you have the most pull, and you're not using weak magnets to where your parts are going to fall off. So we'll cover how to choose the right magnets. This way you have the most strength between the two parts. The other thing is, where do you add your magnets, and why should you add magnets? With 3D printing and statues, you have a lot of switch outs from time to time, especially portraits, or you might have a hand holding a weapon. So again, like in a lot of cases, you might have switch out portraits to where you might have one portrait that you need to swap off for another portrait. So now for this case, this is the Beast from the X-Men. He only comes with one portrait. We don't have to worry about, switch out portraits for him, but we do need to worry about his hair strands. He has really fragile hair strands to the point where I'm almost afraid to hold him because it just feels like it's going to break. So the collector that I'm painting this for, we both discussed whether to glue this on and ship it like this, or to remove it, add some magnets. This way I can ship this off by itself, separate, nicely protected, and not worry about the hair strands breaking. So we're definitely going to add magnets to his head. So I'll show you how to add magnets. And again, I'll show you how to add the correct magnets for the optimal strength. I'll show you some tips and tricks on how to make sure your magnets align correctly between the two parts. This way they click in and you won't have any shifting. You want to make sure they click into the correct position when attaching the two parts. So I'll show you how to align the magnets, some tips and tricks for making sure they line up correctly. And the other thing is adding magnets to the actual hull. So this body here came to me like this. It has a ton of drainage holes all throughout the entire part here. So for the portrait, I'm going to add the magnets. I'm going to reuse the holes that are already here. And I do have some support rods already in there, which would give me enough backing to make sure the magnet doesn't fall through. So if I dropped in some epoxy weld or some epoxy sculpt, at least I have some material back there to hold it into place. But say if you wanted to add a magnet to where you didn't have some backing material, such as this one right here. If I had to put a magnet here, it would just drop straight through. So you want to make sure you have some type of material back there to catch the magnet, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So yeah, we're going to go over the strength of magnets, where to position your magnets, and how to add them to the holes. This way they don't drop all the way through. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to discuss is the actual strength of the magnet to make sure you're getting the most pull from your magnets. I see a lot of statues, especially with licensed companies, using magnets that are very weak and they barely hold the part into place, and then you have to worry about your, say, switch out arm falling off to the floor or just being too loose, when that can be corrected. A lot of times these places are using cheap magnets because they're probably buying them in bulk. But I'm going to do a little bit of science here, a little bit of diagram work, and show you the correct way to make sure you're getting the best magnet that has the best polarity and the best pull between the two parts. So these magnets right here are 8x5, meaning, let's just pop one off real quick, meaning that the outer circle is 8 millimeters and then the depth of the magnet is going to be 5 millimeters. So the numbers are very close. So let me just quickly draw a diagram, because I see a lot of cases where people are using statues and magnets, and your first instincts might be, well, let me get the largest magnet possible. So say if this was your magnet, the outer, circumference, but your magnet's that large, but the depth of the magnet is very skinny. This right here, while it has great surface, if this was like a giant magnet on your part, it has great surface, but it's going to be very weak when you go add the second magnet to it. The polarity between these two magnets would be very weak when attaching them to each other. Even though they have a huge outer circumference, it's going to be a weak magnet. What makes a magnet nice and strong is actually the depth. And you want the depth to match the outside diameter as close as possible. So even though, like I said, this has a large surface area, it's a weak magnet. I'm going to show you what a strong magnet looks like. I could take a smaller magnet, say my little smaller magnet here off to the side, clearly smaller than this one here. But what will make this stronger than this larger magnet right here is going to be the depth. So if I drop in a depth that's that large, that magnet right here is going to be more stronger than this magnet, because this magnet is skinnier. So when you're purchasing your magnets and you want the strongest magnet possible, you want something that has a larger depth. Now, these do get more expensive than buying these skinnier magnets, but if you want the most, pull out of your magnet and for it to be nice and strong, this is what you have to go after. So, for example, these magnets right here are 8x5. Again, it's not 8x8, but it is 8x5. It's pretty close, and it's going to definitely give me a bigger pull compared to this larger magnet with a smaller depth to it. You'll see these here on Amazon all the time because they're sold in huge bulk packs. You can get a pack of 200 of them for pretty cheap, and the reason they're cheaper is because they're not as strong. So stay away. Say if this was a 10 millimeter magnet going this way, but this area right here off to the side was only, say, 2 millimeters. So if this was like a 10 millimeter by a 2 millimeter magnet, yeah, you're getting a nice large surface area, compared to this beast. If I had to add a giant magnet right here, going across, say if this was like 10 millimeters, yeah, it gives you a nice large surface area. But if the magnet itself is not deep going into the model and it's only that 2 millimeter mark, dropping down just a little bit, very thin, you're not going to get a strong pull. It's going to be a very weak magnet. So a magnet that's a lot smaller, something like this, I can put two of these, maybe like one here, and that has a really nice big depth to it that matches the actual outer circumference. So this would be 8x5. This is going to give me a lot more strength compared to a larger surface magnet that has a thinner diameter, if that makes sense. So again, just to go over it again real quick, because it is important. You want to make sure you use a nice strong magnet. You don't want your parts to be weak. For example, this magnet right here has a nice large surface area. It's a lot bigger than my smaller magnet right here. But my smaller magnet is stronger than this bigger magnet because this magnet is very thin. There is no depth to it whatsoever. It's a weak magnet, to where this one has its deepness matches its roundness, its circumference going around. So again, if you're going to purchase, again, they're all over Amazon or your hobby store. Don't go after these giant magnets, or even if they're smaller magnets. Any magnet that's going to have a very thin depth to it like that, it's going to be weak, even if it's a smaller magnet. If you're purchasing smaller magnets and they have that skinny depth to them, it's not going to be strong. You want something like this. You want something to where if this was 8 millimeters, you want this to also be as close to 8 millimeters as possible. So now when it does come to the two numbers, so say if this was an 8 millimeter magnet, you might be thinking, well, if I want it to be even stronger, I'll just buy the most deepest magnet possible. Like I'll go 8 millimeters by 12 millimeters. Well, that actually doesn't change the strength of the magnet. You can never go past what the top number is. So for an 8 millimeter magnet going across this way, the strongest it will ever be is 8 millimeters going this way. You can't outseed the two numbers. So if this was 8 millimeters, the most strength you're ever going to get from the depth is also 8 millimeters. So don't go getting something even longer thinking it's going to be even stronger. The numbers can't surpass each other. So if this is going to be 10 going this way, the most you can go going this way is 10. So they do make, magnets that are a lot longer than they are round. That's not going to give you more strength. That just might be used in certain situations where you need a longer magnet to hold it into place in your object. But increasing one area over the other isn't going to make it stronger. You can never go past what the actual top number is. So again, if this is 10, the most you're going to get out of the bottom is 10. Anything over that is just going to be overkill and not adding any more strength. So try to keep your numbers as close to possible. Again, I'm using these right here. It's 8 by 5. It's not 8 by 8 because it's hard to find 8 by 8, but it is 8 by 5, and it is going to be a lot stronger as opposed to if this was 8 by 2 or 8 by 3, which is more commonly sold. That's going to be a weak magnet. Stay away from these thin magnets. So now that we know about the strength of the magnets, let's go into placing them on the actual model. All right, the next thing I'm going to show you is how to make sure your magnets line up correctly. We're going to pretend like we're starting from scratch. So pretend these holes weren't here and we wanted to make new holes to add magnets, and we wanted to line up these two parts. These are the pants, the waist and bottom half of the beast, and the upper half. Say if we wanted to magnetize these two parts and we wanted to drill holes and put magnets into place, how do you make sure they both line up on both halves? This way your magnets line up correctly when putting them together, and I'll show you a really simple and quick trick to do that. The easiest way to go about doing that is to actually add a dab of paint wherever you want your magnet to go. So say if I put a dab of paint here and a dab of paint there, that's where where I would want the placement of my magnets. What happens is when you push the two parts together, the paint is going to transfer over onto the other part, and that's going to give you your center point to where you want to drill. So let me just quickly show you that. So again, we're going to pretend like none of these holes were here because there's holes all over the place, so it makes this a little bit difficult to demonstrate. So let's just pretend the holes weren't here, and I wanted to drill a hole right here for a magnet, and I wanted to drill a hole right here for a magnet. So I'm just going to add a dab of paint. You don't want to go too big, but you do want it enough on there to where there's enough for it to transfer over. So I got one dab there, and let's put another dab here. Say if we wanted a magnet right there. So that's where our two magnets would go. You're going to take your other part and then just push them together and let the paint transfer over. So let's see, let's push these together. Make sure it lines up correctly. So I'm going to squeeze that together. And when we pull them apart, you can see the paint transferred over onto the other part. And it lines up perfectly. So that's a trick very simple to do to make sure your magnets line up correctly. So those would be your center points. From this point, you would come by with your drill on your center point, drill on your center point. Same thing on the other part. Drill into your center point on the dot and drill onto your center point on the dot. Add your magnets into place. You would have one magnet there, one magnet there, and then one magnet there and one magnet there. And then when you put the two parts together, the magnets will line up absolutely perfect, and you won't have like any shifting between the two parts. Everything will line up nicely, nice and correctly. So again, very simple trick to do to make sure your magnets line up correctly. All right, let's move on to actually adding magnets to where we want them to go on this project, which is going to be the portrait. Okay, so if you have a model where the holes are a little bit larger than the magnet and they don't fit snug, I'll show you how to do that. So again, for this model, it already came with drain holes exactly right there on the neck, and that's where I'm going to place my magnets. I'm going to put one there, and then being that the portrait doesn't have any markings for where the magnet should go, I could, probably eyeball it where it needs to go based on the shape. But if you want this to line up perfectly, we're going to do the same trick that I just did on the pants. And once we get the magnets in place, I'm going to put a drop of paint on each one and push it into the portrait. This way I can see where I need to make my holes on the portrait. This way it lines up perfectly. So the first thing we're going to do is get our magnets onto the neck area of the body. For that, there's a few ways you can do that. One would be, I always like to use JB welding glue or epoxy glue. It's a two-part epoxy mix that you mix together. It goes on like a paste, which is great because the paste will help fill in the gaps and secure the magnets into place, as well as create a backing layer behind it. It's not like a super glue or a gel to where it's just going to run all over the place. If I drop this into the hole, it's going to sit there in place because, like I said, it goes on like a paste. The other thing that I tend to use, and again, it's going to depend on your project and it's going to depend on which hole you need to add a magnet to, is Aves Apoxy Sculpt. This is a sculpting clay, but it's also a epoxy, which makes it an adhesive. So a lot of people don't know that this is actually a very strong adhesive. So you can use this alone without glue. If I dump some Aves Apoxy Sculpt into the hole and drop the magnet into place, it would actually hold it like a glue. And again, it's going to go on almost like a, it's a clay, almost like a paste-like substance, and it will fill in the gaps. So we're going to do that for the neck, and then I'll show you what to do later on something like this. If the hole was just very large and there was absolutely nothing behind it, how you would fill something like that in to add a magnet. But let's first get started on the neck, because that's what's most important on this project, because that's where I actually need to add magnets on this project. So we're going to get started on that. Okay, so some quick tips and tricks when working with magnets and gluing them into place. So I usually just use the whole entire, strand of magnets because it's easier to hold it into place. But you're going to pop off your top magnet like so, and protect the rest of your magnets or whatever. If you had some type of magnetic stick or pole, protect it, and then put your magnet back on place like that. This way, when you go to glue it into place, you're not ruining the rest of your magnets with glue, and you're also not accidentally sticking this magnet onto the rest of the magnets with the glue. So this will protect it. So we'll have our glue on here and we'll let it set into place. The other thing you want to do before setting your magnet into place is, so this is going to be our top surface area that's going to be shown on the actual model. So it'll sit upwards that way. So everything off to the side and perhaps the back, you kind of want to just scuff up a little bit. This way the glue has a little bit of a surface area to bite onto, because these magnets are very, gloss coated and shiny. So you want to kind of give the glue a little bit of something to grip onto. You don't want to sand it down too far to where you're down to the inside of the magnet, but you just want to scrape it up a little bit. This way the glue has something to grip onto. All right, so I have my little sanding stick here. I think it's like a 120 grit, and just going to rough up the area on the outside. As mentioned, this way it has a little bit of a surface area for the glue to grab onto. You basically just want to dull it so it's not so shiny looking. So I'm going to go around, scuff this up, and I'll be right back. All right, so I scuffed this one up a little bit. Probably not going to be noticeable on camera, although you can kind of see the swirl marks right there from the sandpaper. So basically just scuffing it up like that a little bit. If that's showing up on camera right there, you just want to scuff it up. For the sake of this project, since kind of trying to move quick for the video, if you were working with the Aves Apoxy Sculpt, this stuff takes a couple of hours to set and then 24 hours to dry overnight, which is no problem. I do use that from time to time, but to keep things moving quickly, the JB epoxy weld, especially this one that I like to use all the time, it sets in 6 minutes. So within 6 minutes, I can have these magnets in place and move on to the next one. So for the sake of this project, we're gonna use the JB epoxy welding glue. And I do already have an entire dedicated video on how to use JB epoxy weld. Check out my video, the best glue for repairs and statues, something along that line. I'll leave a link in the description as well as on the video. Basically though, it's a two-part epoxy. You're mixing equal halves together, and then once mixed together, you have roughly a couple of minutes working time, and then the stuff cures, or at least sets, within 6 minutes. So I'm going to get these mixed together and we'll set our magnets into place. All right, so I have my magnet roughly where I want it to be, resting in place. I'm gonna let this sit for about 6 minutes until it dries, and I'll be right back. All right, it's been about 6 minutes. I could see from my mixing dish here, the glue, the epoxy weld is hard as a rock. So that means this is set into place right now. So we're just going to remove this very carefully. As you can see, we can just pull that off now. And there's our magnet. If we remove the plastic, and there we go. We have our magnet set into place. It's holding strong already, and it's already been 6 minutes, but I'm going to let it fully cure. I believe it takes about 6 hours. This epoxy welding glue by JB Weld, it's also sandable, paintable, so once this fully sets, I can sand it down a little bit and clean up the area, as well as paint over it if I need to paint over it. So I'm going to go over and do the other side, and then I'll show you how to go about adding holes and adding the rest of the magnets and drilling into this. This way it fully clicks into place and we have a nice set of parts held by magnets. All right, so I got my two magnets set into place. Everything looks good. They're sitting nice and flush. They still need time to cure, but like I mentioned with that JB weld, it grabs very quickly, and as of right now, they're not going anywhere, so we can continue working. All right, so I'm going to do that trick again to where we can transfer the paint dots over onto the portrait. This way I can see where I need to drill. And then afterwards, I'm going to show you another trick on how to fill holes with a different method. It's a lot easier. This way, if you had something that was very hollowed out, such as that, to where something can fall through, I'm going to show you how to patch up giant holes like this towards the end of the video. But for now, we're going to move on to transferring the paint onto the portrait. So same thing as before. You can, use whatever you want in terms of paint color. Staying with pink because it's nice and bright. Basically want to put it right on the center, because that's going to be your center point to where you're going to drill on the actual portrait. So we got one there. One there. Probably did a little too much on that one. Let me just add a little bit more to the other side so it stays a little bit more consistent. Okay, hopefully that's enough. Let's see. If it doesn't push in, if it doesn't make an impression onto the portrait, I'll just have to add a little bit more. But push again, same as before. Push your two parts in together. Line them up correctly. Like so. Push tight. Let's see if we get an impression. Okay, there we go. And that's going to be our two center points for where we're going to want to drill. And then after you make your transfer, you could just wipe off the paint. This still will also need to get primed afterwards, so I'm not too worried about how clean it's looking. This is just the rough stages. Obviously, you want to do all this before you begin painting. So let's get to drilling into the portrait. All right, so when drilling holes for magnets, you could start off with the pilot hole, depending on what size hole you need to make. But basically, you want something the same size, same drill bit size as the circumference of the actual magnet. So I'm going to start off with something smaller just to drill, a pilot hole into the statue first. So obviously that would be too small compared to the magnet, but once we get this into a starting point, we'll probably finish off with something about that size, which is roughly the diameter or circumference of the actual magnet size. This way it fits nice and snug. Okay, and that's going to be our starting hole. Let me get the other one done, and then we'll expand it a little bit. This way it holds on to the magnet. Okay, I'm gonna switch up drill bits just to make that a little bit larger. This way it accommodates the size of our magnet. So one trick when drilling is to actually drill in reverse as opposed to drilling forward clockwise. When you drill clockwise through a plastic part, you'll notice, if you ever done this before, that it sometimes grabs and catches and can make the part spin. So by reversing the spinning direction, it'll actually allow you to spin backwards and drill a nice hole without it flying out out of your hand and shaking or possibly causing damage to the part. So it still drills through the plastic and gives you a little bit more precision when drilling. So I got the first hole up top to the right size to where we can fit in our magnet. So that's good. I'm going to do the bottom hole now to expand it, and we'll get to gluing the magnets into place. So again, instead of going forward, which can cause this to turn, we're going to drill in reverse. Okay, looks like that'll be good right there. I'm going to get this washed off and cleaned up, get rid of all this dust, and then we'll get to gluing the part, and I'll show you that trick on filling holes. All right, so here's how our portrait is looking. Got 2 holes, perfectly the size of our magnets. Definitely fits better than what we did with the body, and that was only because those holes were already there. So if possible, it's always best to drill your own holes. This way they fit a little bit tighter, like so. But you do want to leave a little bit of wiggle room. This way the epoxy glue has somewhere to go and expand and actually grip onto the magnet. So same thing, I'm gonna mix up my 2-part epoxy of JB Weld, and we'll get these inserted. One thing that's really important when putting on the reverse side magnets is you want to make sure you're using the correct polarity and you're not using the matching one that might click into place like so. You want to use the reverse end that's going to push away the polarity. So this end is going to be the end that goes up towards into our hole, and then those ends over here will be the ones that click into our magnet like so. So again, I'm just going to keep everything on my magnet stick here. It keeps remembering it easier. As you can see, it's pushing it away, moving the part. It won't stick. So that's the end we're going to use to go into that hole. So let me mix up my glue, we'll get that inserted, and we'll test the fitment of the portrait onto the body. Okay, so I have my JB Weld. Again, it's a 2-part epoxy. You're mixing up 2 equal halves. I have a clean dish this time, so you can actually see a little bit better as to what's going on. I don't really need too much this time because these holes are a little bit snugger, and it's not very hollow on the inside of the portrait, so I don't really have to fill up too much space creating a backing part for material for the magnet to sit in place. It's already top one is already solid, and then the bottom one I created like a little bit of a lip. This way the magnet doesn't go too far back. It actually has something to rest against. So we have our 2-part epoxy, equal halves. Probably didn't even need that much, but I always like to mix up just a little bit of extra just in case. It's always better to have extra than not enough when working with glue that dries very quickly. All right, just use my little wooden mixing stick. Again, mixing it together. You have roughly a minute or 2, but you want to make sure you mix it thoroughly together for a good minute. If it's not mixed together correctly, you will have issues with this not curing properly. So it's better to take time to make sure this is thoroughly mixed than it is to try to rush the working time. They do make other versions of this epoxy glue. So again, it's like a paste. As you can see, it's like dripping. That's why I like to use it. It's a paste. It sits into place. It's not like super glue where it's runny or like a gel. Kind of stays to where you put it. And so this one cures within, or it sets within 6 minutes. So it's a quick drying time, but they do make ones that cure a little bit slower, more like 4 to 6 hours. But personally, I don't have time to sit there for 4 to 6 hours to wait for something to dry when I can have it dry within 6 minutes. So let me just double check the magnet. Okay, we're using this end. So we're gonna just double check that one more time. All right, we're using that side. So I'm gonna protect these from the glue. Put the one we're gonna glue into place back on top. Make sure you scuff up the edges, and then let's double check it one more time, because once it's in place, there's no coming out. All right, so that's the end that's going to go up into the portrait. So take some of our glue. Probably don't, like I said, don't need as much this time around. Go into the top area here. And again, if you do get it all over the place, it is sandable. Okay. A little bit more. That's good right there. Got our magnet, and same as before, I'm going to let this sit into place, and then I'll come back in 6 minutes. Okay, going to let that sit for 6 minutes, and I'll be right back. All right, so I finished up the portrait, setting the magnets into place. I set this one back a little bit further because it was kind of like on a slant there. So I added a little bit more glue around the outside so it's buried a little bit more, but no worries. These magnets, like I said, are super strong. So we have our 2 magnets on the portrait now, as well as on the neck of the body. So we're gonna click these together and test out the fitment. Okay, and everything is fitting good. Got a nice strong pull. That's about how much strength I need to pull it off. There you go. Plenty strong. It's not going anywhere. I could shake it upside down. It's a nice strong magnet. Nice strong connection. Nice strong pull. Everything lines up perfectly. So before we go, I'm going to quickly show you how to fill larger holes if you just had to plug certain areas, or if you needed to fill up the insides a little bit before adding a magnet. So let me show you that real quick. Okay, another method for filling holes and adding some material within the hole. If your part was hollow like this, I do have some supports in the way, but for example, this one's hollowed out. And the same thing, for example, if you wanted to add a magnet in there, or if you just wanted to quickly cover up holes, this is the bottom of a sub base, so you're not even going to see this part. Obviously now I can go in with some Epoxy Sculpt and form that over the hole to plug up the hole. The problem is that gets a little bit expensive using Epoxy Sculpt. Also with Epoxy Sculpt, it takes a while to dry. Even though, you know, as much as I love using this stuff, Also with the Epoxy Sculpt, if you were to fill up holes this large, you want to wait until the Epoxy Sculpt sets for roughly half hour to an hour. This way it hardens up a little bit. This way when you go to push it through the hole, it doesn't just go flying through the hole all the way through, because basically you want to make a plug that stays in place. If you throw Epoxy Sculpt directly in there right now, chances are it's going to fall all the way through. So a quick and cheap method for filling holes that you don't really care about is cotton balls with some super glue. You can take the cotton ball, I'm going to explain it first and then I'll do it. You can take the cotton ball, shove it into the hole, take some super glue, apply it onto the cotton ball. Basically you want to soak the cotton, and it kind of causes like a chemical reaction which will also release some vapors, so make sure you have a ventilation fan if you decide to do this. It kind of turns it into a fiberglass material. So when the cotton mixes with the super glue, all the strands of cotton bind with the super glue, and it's not real, it's not actual fiberglass, but it becomes a consistency of a fiberglass material, to where it's a little bit pliable and you can move it around, and it hardens up to a hard plastic because it's going to be all super glue. And you can also jam it in there and sand it down afterwards. So let me show you that, and then I'll show you how it looks afterwards. All right, so you want to basically get just enough cotton to where it plugs the hole. It doesn't go anywhere, so I probably don't need this much. I'll do this hole right here since this doesn't really have any supports in the way. It's more of a hollowed out hole. So I'm just going to rip this in half. And you want to make sure you saturate the cotton ball with the super glue. I can't even rip this stuff. All right, there it goes. So I'm just going to measure out about how much I need to actually plug up the hole without it falling through. So I would say, and it's all right, you want to leave a little bit of excess like that. Once the super glue goes on there, it'll harden up, and then you can always sand it down a little bit. That's why it's important to fully saturate the cotton ball. So right about there would be good. You want to fully saturate the cotton ball because you don't want to leave this softer stuff on the inside. You want to make sure it fully saturates with the super glue. This way the whole entire thing hardens up into a plastic, and it basically becomes one big giant plastic plug. So now you might be asking, well, why didn't you just print plugs from the part when you had this 3D printed? You have the object when you make drain holes to save those drain holes, and also print the drain holes. This way you can plug them up. Obviously that would be a lot easier. However, this kit was sent to me like this. It has holes everywhere that I now need to plug up. The plugs were not sent to me. So in this case, we're going to have to plug it up with some cotton balls or some other type of method, whatever you want to choose. But it's just not for larger holes. If you had to plug up smaller holes, if it was something even like over here that you wanted to plug up and you didn't want to use like Aves Apoxy Sculpt, again, it's a quick method. You shove some cotton in there, add some super glue, and it'll harden up to a plastic-like material. All right, so back to the base. Let's get this plugged up, and I'll show you how it looks afterwards. Okay, so I'm just going to first add a little bit of super glue to soak up the bottom area. This way this hardens up on the inside as well. And then we'll insert this into the hole to plug it up, and we'll come back with a little bit more super glue. So I'm going to get that into place so I don't get super glue in my hands. I'm going to use a little stick here. Get that into place. Stick in here. Okay. Okay, I have that in place. I'm just going to come back now with some more super glue on top. Probably should put on gloves so I don't get this all over me. And again, this does cause a vapor reaction, so make sure you have ventilation. So we're just going to add some to the top now. You can use any super glue. It doesn't have to be, you know, anything expensive. Get some stuff from the dollar store. And we're going to fully saturate the cotton swab. All right, so I'm going to let that set for about 5 to 10 minutes and harden up, and then I can sand it down and show you the finished look. Okay, and quickly looking at the sub base, what we did with the cotton ball with the super glue. So I spent a little bit of time scraping it down and sanding it somewhat flat. I didn't want to spend too much time. This way we can keep this video moving along and not spend too much time on each step. But as you can see, it's pretty flat. So from here, obviously you would want to sand it down more, and then you can paint over it. You could also drill through this if you were using this as a backing to kind of plug the hole for a magnet. So now from here you can drill through it, and then grab my magnet. You could drill through it and then drop your magnet in place. This way you fill up a hole that way. So there's different ways to fill up the holes for adding magnets if you had to, or just plugging holes in general. I still need to go around and do the rest of these. But yeah, the cotton ball with the super glue, it's an old carpenter trick for plugging holes, trying to fix like warped screws. You would plug the hole with cotton, add a little super glue, and then you can re-add your screw. This way it grips better. So kind of forms, like I said, kind of like a fiberglass type consistency of a material. So this works out as a cheap alternative if you didn't want to use your Aves Apoxy Sculpt. But let me get out the Aves Apoxy Sculpt and I'll show you how that looks when plugging up holes. All right, so then if you didn't want to use the cotton ball method, you could also use Aves Apoxy Sculpt. That's usually my go-to for pretty much anything, as well as filling gaps. Check out my video on how to fill gaps. I explain how to use this stuff. But basically, I have a hole right here where a beast's foot kind of rests in place. This is the top half of the base. And then, as mentioned, if you are going to use Aves Epoxy Sculpt, mix it up ahead of time and let it sit. This way it hardens up for a little bit. So I already mixed the two halves together, and I had this sitting off to the side for about 20 minutes now. So it's starting to get a little bit more harder, and then we can go in and plug the hole. I'll show you how to do it with the Aves, and then afterwards you can also sand this stuff as well. And because it is an epoxy sculpt, it does have adhesive properties to it, so it will bind to the inside of the hole. Just make sure as you're pushing it through that it doesn't fall all the way through. You kind of want to make a plug out of the stuff and kind of let it sit over onto the top surface of the area, and then come back and sand it down. So let me show you how to do that. So taking your Aves Epoxy Sculpt, I'm basically just going to make a plug out of it. Going to form it a little bit smaller around the sides to the shape of the hole, and then the outside will have a larger surface area. This way it kind of sits like a lip onto the top of the surface. But I want to kind of keep it as thin as possible to where it stays in place, but to where I don't have to go back and do too much sanding. So I'm going to do a few test fits and then I'll get it into place. Okay, and there is a rough look of how it would look. I have it pretty much onto the surface, so I don't have to go back and do much sanding. It doesn't have to be too pretty because it's kind of where his foot rests over, so you're not even going to see this once the statue is assembled. I basically just needed to plug it up this way it wasn't an eyesore, and looks a little bit more consistent and solid with the rest of the base. But basically that's how you would plug holes using Aves Epoxy Sculpt. And again, the secret and the key to getting it to stay in place and not fall through the hole is you need to let it sit out for a while. Let it sit out for about a half hour. This way it hardens up and it's not going to go anywhere. If you try to mix it up right away and then try to fill the hole with a plug, it's going to fall right through. And also keep in mind, this also applies to adding magnets, not just filling random holes around your project. So if you had a hollowed out hole to where you felt like the magnet was going to fall through and you kind of wanted to plug it up first, you could plug it up with the Aves Epoxy. This stuff is sandable as well as you can drill through it. So basically we made our plug. So for example, if this was now on the inside of our hole, sitting like this right there, this would be, our surface, and then this would be inside of the hole. You can come back, take a drill. Once it dries, drill through the stuff, make a large enough hole to where you can now come back with your magnet, drop your magnet into place, and now your magnet has a backing to sit into place, and it's not going to fall into the hole. So, and again, another useful material for plugging up holes and adding a backing support for your magnets so they don't fall into the project or your 3D print. All right, and that's going to wrap up this video on how to add magnets to your 3D prints. As shown here, we have nice strong connections now. Everything lines up correctly. Nice strong magnets that aren't going to go anywhere. So whether you're using the cotton ball method with the super glue, or if you're using the Aves Apoxy Sculpt, the plug holes before adding the magnets, the same thing with the JB Weld. You can use this to fill gaps before adding your magnets into place. Any of these materials can be drilled into. So you can drill into it, add your magnet. This way it has a stopping, a backer to it. Or if you just need to plug up holes in general, those are your methods, or at least the methods that I like to use. If you have any questions on anything to do with today's video or anything in general, leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next project. I'll still be working on this beast. So stay tuned and subscribed. Please hit the like button, and I'll see you soon. Take care.